Be me, my name is Kristen. This story starts about 10 years ago, when I was 23. I had just graduated, landed a decent entry-level job in marketing, and was living in a trendy, overpriced one-bedroom apartment. Life felt like it was just beginning, and I was the main character. My philosophy on life, and especially on dating, was crystal clear. I wasn't just a feminist, I was a pragmatist. I believed in female empowerment, and to me, that meant never, ever settling. I remember one specific evening. It was probably a Thursday. My friends were over. We were drinking cheap wine and complaining about men. Standard stuff. One of my friends was talking about a guy she was seeing. He was sweet, funny, but worked as a barista and was still living with 2 roommates. She was wondering if she should get serious with him. I remember almost spitting out my wine. I couldn't believe we were even having this conversation. I stood up and gave them my big speech, the one I'd been perfecting in my head for months. Listen, I said. We are educated, ambitious women. We work hard. We are not here to build a man from the ground up. That's not our job. It's not a partnership if one person is a project. My rules were simple, and I laid them out for my friends like they were commandments. A man, by the age of 25, needed to have 2 things to even be considered dateable: his own car and his own place, not a roommate situation, not his parents' basement, his own. To me, it wasn't about money. It was about stability. It was a benchmark for maturity, ambition, and basic competence. A car meant he wasn't a child anymore, dependent on public transport or bumming rides. A place of his own meant he was responsible. A guy without a car and a place isn't a man, I declared. He's a boy with a job. My friends all nodded. They were completely on board. My words validated the frustration they all felt. We were a united front of high standards. In that same apartment building, on the same floor as me, lived a guy. I didn't know his name at first. I just called him the bus stop guy in my head. His name was Leo. I found that out later. He looked to be about my age, maybe a year or 2 older. He was quiet, always wore simple clothes like hoodies and jeans, and carried a backpack everywhere. My first real interaction with him was a few weeks after my commandments speech. I was coming back from a massive grocery run, trying to carry 4 overloaded bags at once because I refused to make 2 trips. Of course, one of the paper bags tore right as I was fumbling for my keys. An avalanche of apples, yogurt cups, and a box of cereal cascaded across the hallway floor. Just my luck, Leo was walking out of his apartment right at that moment. He had this slightly awkward but kind look on his face. He immediately rushed to help, saying something about how those paper bags were the worst. I was so embarrassed and annoyed. I just wanted to get inside and be done with the day. I remember snapping, "I've got it," in a tone that was much colder than necessary. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. Worn-out sneakers, a faded band t-shirt. He didn't scream ambition. He screamed roommate and a bus pass. He backed off, looking a little hurt, and just said, "Okay, well, have a good one." In my mind, he was instantly and permanently categorized. A no. Not even a maybe if I was desperate. A hard no. A month or so later, I matched with Blake on a dating app. Blake was the physical embodiment of my checklist. He was 28, vice president at some finance firm. His profile pictures were a mix of him in a tailored suit, on a sailboat, and skiing in Aspen. Our first date, he picked me up in a black BMW that still had that new car smell. The leather seats felt like butter. He took me to a steakhouse where the water cost more than my lunch. The entire conversation was about him, his portfolio, his recent promotion, a business trip to Singapore he was planning. I was captivated. This was it. This was what a high-value man looked and sounded like. He was confident, successful, and didn't need me to build him. He was already built. We started dating. The first few months were a blur of expensive dinners, rooftop bars, and weekend getaways he paid for without a second thought. He bought me a designer handbag for my birthday. My friends were green with envy. I felt like I had won. I was living proof that my philosophy worked. You hold out for the best, and you get the best. But there were little red flags. He rarely talked about the future. Anytime I tried to have a "what are we" conversation, he'd skillfully change the subject. He was emotionally distant, like a beautiful, well-furnished room that you weren't allowed to actually live in. I ignored it. I told myself that successful men were just busy. They didn't have time for a lot of emotional fluff. This was the price of admission for dating in the big leagues. Meanwhile, life in the apartment building continued. I would see Leo in the hallways occasionally. He'd give a small, polite nod, and I'd give one back. We never spoke again after the grocery bag incident. One day I saw him with a girl. She was pretty, but in a very understated way. No heavy makeup, no designer clothes. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater. Her name was Emily. They were holding hands and laughing about something as they waited for the elevator. They looked comfortable, happy in a quiet, domestic way that I secretly found boring. I remember thinking, well, good for him. He found someone on his level. It was a condescending thought, and I knew it, but it made me feel better about my own complicated situation with Blake. They were a Honda Civic, and I was dating a BMW. There was no comparison. Sometimes, late at night, I would notice the light was still on in Leo's apartment across the courtyard. I could see his silhouette at his desk. I just figured he was a gamer or a night owl, wasting time on the internet. My relationship with Blake lasted about a year and a half. It ended exactly how you'd expect. I finally pushed the "what are we" conversation too hard. I wanted to know where we were going. He gave me the classic speech. He wasn't looking for anything serious right now. He was focused on his career. He thought we were just having fun. I was devastated, but my pride wouldn't let me show it. My friends tried to comfort me, but I brushed it off. He was the right type, just not the right guy, I insisted. My standards are correct. My execution was just off. I took maybe a month off from dating before I was back on the apps, swiping with a vengeance. My criteria were now even stricter. I went out with a lawyer who talked about his billable hours all night, then a tech startup guy who used the word synergy in every other sentence, then a consultant who was even more emotionally unavailable than Blake. It was a revolving door of impressive resumes and empty connections. They were all the same type. They'd wine and dine me for a few months, and then, the moment I showed any sign of wanting real commitment, they'd vanish. It was a game, and I was starting to realize I didn't know the rules. Around year 3, I was 26, still in the same apartment, still at the same job, though I'd gotten a small promotion. The dating grind was starting to wear on me. The constant effort of presenting a perfect version of myself, the small talk, the eventual disappointment. It was exhausting. One Saturday, I was doing laundry in the building's basement facility. Leo and Emily came in, carrying their own basket. They smiled at me. This time, I managed a small, genuine "hey" back. They were talking about a piece of furniture they wanted to buy for their apartment, a bookshelf. They were debating between two different kinds, their heads close together as they looked at a picture on Emily's phone. It was such a normal, mundane conversation. But there was an easy intimacy to it that I hadn't realized I was missing. They were a team. They were building a life, one bookshelf at a time. I finished my laundry quickly and went back to my apartment, which suddenly felt very quiet and very empty. My designer handbag from Blake was sitting on my dresser. It didn't feel like a trophy anymore. It just felt like a thing. Years 4 and 5 were a blur. I was in my late 20s. A couple of my close friends, the same ones who had cheered on my high standards speech, started to drop off. One met a guy, a high school teacher. He didn't own a car for the first year they dated because he lived close to work. He definitely didn't own his own place. By my rules, he was an automatic disqualification. She fell in love with him. I remember her telling me she was engaged. I tried to be happy for her, but all I could think was, "You settled. You gave up." She must have seen it on my face. She told me, "Kristen, he makes me happy. He's kind, and he supports me. That's the real high value." I didn't get it. I thought she was just making excuses. 6 months later, another friend got married to a plumber she'd known since college. He ran his own small business. They bought a small house in the suburbs. My social circle was shrinking, replaced by couples. I was becoming the token single friend, the one they'd try to set up with their weird cousin who works in IT. I was still seeing glimpses of Leo and Emily's life. One day, I saw them in the parking lot. They were standing next to a brand new but very sensible Toyota sedan. Leo was showing Emily how to use the Bluetooth feature. They were laughing. He had bought a car. Not long after that, I saw them moving out of their one-bedroom apartment. I felt a brief flash of triumph, thinking they were leaving. But they were just moving upstairs, into one of the 2-bedroom units. They were upgrading. I was still in the same one-bedroom apartment I'd moved into at 22. The logic was undeniable. He had a car. He had a bigger place. According to my own rules, he was now technically on the list of dateable men. The thought was so absurd, it almost made me laugh. But there was no humor in it. There was just a growing, gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach that I was missing something fundamental about how the world worked. I pushed the feeling down. I doubled down on my strategy. I told myself my person was still out there. He was probably just stuck in traffic in his Mercedes on his way to find me. I was almost 30. The clock was ticking, and I was starting to hear it. Every single day, my 30th birthday came and went. Birthday came. I threw a party for myself, invited everyone I knew. It was a loud, expensive affair designed to convince myself I was thriving. It felt hollow. Many of my friends had to leave early to get back to babysitters. The single ones who stayed got drunk and lamented about the state of dating, our conversations becoming a bitter echo of the ones we had at 23, only now laced with desperation instead of optimistic arrogance. The dating apps became a barren wasteland. The pool of men in their early 30s who were successful, single, and looking for a serious relationship was practically non-existent. The ones who fit my criteria were a special kind of awful. They knew their market value. They treated dating like a job interview where they were the CEO and you were one of 100 applicants. I went on a date with a wealth manager who spent 20 minutes explaining the depreciation curve of my car before suggesting we go back to his place. Another one, a surgeon, checked his watch 3 times during dinner and then told me he was actively dating women in their early 20s because they were less complicated and more optimistic. My profile bio, which I once thought was a powerful filter, now felt like a liability. Ambitious woman seeking an equally ambitious partner. Please have your life together. It screamed high maintenance to the men I wanted and attracted the ones who thought money was a substitute for a personality. My standards, which I had held up like a shield for so long, had become a cage. One afternoon, I was scrolling through social media. A friend of a friend had posted photos from a wedding she'd attended, and there they were, Leo and Emily. It wasn't a huge, extravagant wedding. It looked like it was held in a nice garden with string lights and happy people. Emily was in a simple but beautiful dress. Leo was in a suit that fit him perfectly. They both had these huge, genuine smiles on their faces, the kind of smiles that aren't for the camera, the kind that come from a place of pure, unadulterated joy. They looked like a team, a real team. I stared at that photo for a long time. There was no BMW in the background, no mention of his job title. Just 2 people starting their lives together supported by friends and family. A bitter thought crossed my mind. I bet they're in a mountain of debt for this. But the thought died as soon as it appeared. It was a weak defense mechanism, and I knew it. They looked happy. I was not. It was that simple. The next couple of years were the loneliest of my life. I was 32. My job was fine. I was making good money. I could afford nice things. I took solo trips to exotic places and posted curated photos online to prove how fulfilling my life was. But the evenings were silent. The weekends were long. My married friends would call, but our lives were on different tracks. They'd talk about mortgages, potty training, and parent-teacher conferences. I'd talk about a bad date I'd been on, and I could hear the pity in their voices. They stopped trying to set me up with people. I think they just ran out of single friends. Or maybe they knew my checklist was impossible to meet. I had one last memorable encounter with Leo and Emily. It was a Saturday morning, and I was heading to my car to go to a yoga class. They were getting out of their Toyota in the building's parking garage. Emily was pregnant, very pregnant. Leo was carrying a box full of what looked like parts for a baby crib. He looked different than the quiet kid I remembered. He stood taller. There was a calm confidence about him that wasn't there 10 years ago. He had grown into himself. They both said hello. I congratulated them on the baby. Emily was warm and friendly, asking me how I was doing. Leo was just polite. He smiled, but his eyes were already on Emily, making sure she was okay. I wasn't a factor in his world. I was just a neighbor, a familiar face he'd seen around for a decade. The boy I had written off as a project was about to become a father, a husband, a man who was clearly the center of his wife's world. I got into my car, sat there for a minute, and didn't go to yoga. The final nail in the coffin of my delusion came on a Friday night a few months after my 33rd birthday. I had a date planned with a guy from an app, another high-value man. He owned a chain of fitness centers. An hour before we were supposed to meet, he texted me. "So sorry, something came up at work." Rain check? I knew what rain check meant. It meant never. I had been ghosted. Again. So I was alone, in my apartment. The same one-bedroom I'd lived in for over a decade. I ordered takeout, poured a glass of wine, and did what every lonely person does. I started scrolling through my phone. I saw posts from friends' vacations, engagement announcements from younger coworkers, and then I saw a post from Leo. He wasn't someone I followed, but a mutual acquaintance had liked it, so it appeared in my feed. The picture stopped me cold. It was him, Emily, and a toddler with a head of curly hair sitting on his shoulders. They were standing on the lawn of a beautiful 2-story house. It was a classic suburban home with a big oak tree in the front yard and a porch swing. In the driveway was a new car, an SUV, much nicer than the old Toyota. The caption was simple. "Hard to believe this is ours. Officially homeowners." And I just broke, not in a loud, crying way. It was a quiet, internal shattering. The house, the car, the family. He had it all. Everything that was on my non-negotiable list from 10 years ago. He had achieved and surpassed every single metric I had set for what a man should be. But he didn't have any of it when Emily met him. He wasn't a high-value man when she chose him. He was just Leo, a quiet guy with a dream, who worked hard when no one was watching. The guy I saw at his desk late at night wasn't playing video games. He was building his future. Emily didn't look for a finished product. She found a good person with potential, and they built a life together. She didn't buy a winning lottery ticket. She invested in solid stock and watched it grow. I looked around my apartment. At the designer bag from a man who forgot my name a week after he left. At the expensive art on the walls I bought to make the place feel less empty. At the single place setting on my coffee table. My entire strategy, my whole philosophy, was a catastrophic failure. I had spent 10 years trying to cash a check that a man had already earned. Emily had spent 10 years helping a man write his own. I wasn't a feminist who valued herself. I was a coward who was terrified of risk. I wanted the reward without the effort, the success without the struggle. I had been filtering for a lifestyle, not for a partner. For a provider, not a person. The man I wrote off as a boy with a job was more of a man than any of the slick, suited guys I had chased for a decade. He built. They just spent. I closed my phone. The silence in my apartment was deafening. For the first time, I didn't blame the men, the apps, or society. The fault was mine. My standards weren't high. They were just aimed at all the wrong things. Character, loyalty, partnership, kindness, teamwork. Those were the real high-value assets. And I had spent 10 years walking right past them in the hallway, too arrogant and too blind to see.